तद्वक्तारम् अवतु
अवतु माम् अवतु
अवतु माम् अवतु
वक्तारम्
वक्ता
अवतु वक्तारम्
वक्तारम् अवतु वक्तारम्
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः
ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः
भद्रं पश्येम अक्षभिर्यजत्राः
भद्रं पक्ष्ये मक्षभिर्यजत् sorry, can you repeat it?
पश्येम
भद्रं पश्ये अक्ष
भीर
वीर
जत्राः
जत्राः
भद्रं पश्येम अक्षभिर्यजत्राः
भद्रं पक्ष्ये अक्षभिर्यजत्राः
स्थिरैरङ्गे
स्थिरैरङ्गे
तुष्टवाग्वं
सुष्ठुभाग्वं
स्वस्तनूभिः
स्वस्तनूभिः
व्यश्येम देवहितं यदायुः
व्यश्यं देवहि यदायुः
स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृधश्रवाः
स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृधश्रवाः
स्वस्ति न पूषा विश्ववेदाः
स्वस्ति न विश्ववेदाः
स्वस्ति न पूषा विश्ववेदाः
स्वस्ति न पूषा विश्ववेदाः
स्वस्ति नस्ताक्षर्यो अरिष्टनेमिः
स्वस्ति न ताक्षर्यो अरिष्टनेमिः नेमिः
स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु
स्वस्ति न बृहस्पतिर्देहतातु
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
ॐ अहं वृक्षस्य रेरिव
ॐ अहं वृक्षस्य रेरिव
कीर्तिः पृष्ठं गिरेरिव
कीर्तिपृष्ठं गिरेरिव
ऊर्ध्वपवित्रो वाजनीव
ऊर्ध्वपवित्रो वाजनीव
स्वामृतम् अस्मि
स्वामृतम् अस्मि
द्रविणं
द्रवणं
सर्वर्चसं
सर्वच्चितं
सुमेधा अमृतोक्षतः
सुमेधा अमृतोषितः
इति त्रिशङ्कोर्वेदानुवचनम्
इति त्रिशङ्को वेदानुवचनम्
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Thank you, Vijay. What I'll suggest is in our class, with Kumar, when we had started chanting virtually, then he had spent a few weeks to take us through this. So we would do the invocation shlokas, and then we would spend the first 10 minutes or so just practicing the pronunciation of these invocation shlokas so that everyone gets it correctly. So while we have we shared the Aparna's rendition? So you can practice with that at home, but even in the class, what we'll do from next class onwards is that we'll spend 10 minutes practicing it. And the way we'll do it is that we will, there is one person who will follow. So we'll create a roster for that practice session as well. So like I say, I lead, and then Vijay is responding back. So it will give us moments to actually correct for every single word. And the others who are not following, but you're listening in, and so you can take notes and you can then practice. And we'll do it in a roster until everyone is comfortable reciting these shlokas. Because I understand that we've not done enough practice for this. And so, some of those words are really tough. It's not easy to get them. So now that we are a few weeks into this class, I think it's a good time to get us to start practicing the invocation shlokas as well. Okay, so we'll start from next week and we'll start a roster to help practice. Okay, it's going to be a good one. Okay.
All right.
good to see everyone. So I think last time we stopped at shloka number 48. I think we read 48 and now we're at shloka number 49. So these are all very important shlokas as part of chapter 2 and leading up to chapter 3. So chapter 3 is all about Karma Yogi and how do we, what does a Karma Yogi do? And chapter 2 here, after we've talked about the soul and we've talked about the purity of the soul, the characteristics, to help identify ourselves with a real self inside of us, we've gone and now talked a bit about Karma Yogi. So he's touched upon it here. He's given us some basic concepts because, like Arjun, who's a Jivatma, we are also Jivatmas. His journey is our journey. And we are all people of action. We all have duty to perform. We all have action to perform. This is not a choice we have. We were just born in the family's circumstances that we are born, where we have to do action. We have to be a parent, we have to be a husband, we have to be an employee, a business owner, a son to a parents, all of that. We're men of action. And in the Gita, the journey for the person in action is Karma Yogi. How do you connect with the divine through your action? That is what Karma Yogi means. Karma means doing, Yog means connecting. So how do you connect with Bhagwanji? How do you connect with this universal energy? By doing your karma. Because we cannot get away from our karma, right? So last class we also studied a little bit or talked a little bit about as a karma yogi, because of our past life sanskars, because of our past life prarabdha, we are born as people who have actions to complete, have prarabdha to finish, correct? In this life as a karma yogi, we only have the right to our action. We don't have the right to our results. If the results come, that's fantastic. It's a blessing. It should be seen with the lens of prasad buddhi. That means everything that is coming in your life is a prasad. It's an offering from God or from the universe to us, and we should be able to see it from that lens. So we have a right to the action. We have a right to do our duty, but we don't have a right for the result. So we have the right to be a good, to do our action as a parent. But if the child does not take care of us in our old age, that's not our entitlement. That is his prarabdha, your prarabdha, everything else that is coming together. Yeah. And the only way for us to achieve this sense of dispassion towards the result and focusing on the action is having an even-minded intellect, which is equanimous. An intellect that controls your mind from chasing likes and dislikes, from your intellect that controls your ego from agreeing with people or disagreeing and arguing with people. An intellect that is even-minded regardless of the favorable, unfavorable, honorable, dishonorable things that are happening in your life. So for a karma yogi, and in the Gita, we talk a lot about equanimity and even-mindedness, because that is the axe. If you remember the example, that's the axe we have as woodcutters to cut our prarabdha, right? And in this previous in the previous class, we also talked about that this intellect is we have to sharpen it for it to become a vyavasayatmika buddhi, which means a business-minded intellect, an intellect that is rooted in maximizing gain with our actions. And out here, we need to attach our intellect not to worldly objects, which we do right now. It maximizes profit of stock market. No, that is not what the purpose of our intellect is. You can use it for that if that's your job. But our purpose of life is to achieve moksha, is to not come back into this cycle of life and death. So the purpose of our intellect, the Vyavasayatamika Buddhi, the business-minded intellect that we have, should focus on how do we maximize our growth in this life so that we attain a higher purpose. And once you know that, then your intellect will start working on becoming equanimous and even-minded in action. Yeah. So we've studied that now. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what's the different motivations behind an action, the desire motivated action, and how that plays out in our lives. Yeah.
Ashwin, you will read with me? Durena hyavaram karma.
Durena havyarya karma.
Hyavaram karma.
Hyavaram karma.
Buddhi yoga dhananjaya.
Buddhi yoga dhananjaya.
Buddha sharanam anvicha.
Buddha sharanam anvicha.
Krapana phalhetavaha.
Krapana palahetavaha.
So, why don't you read the the italics?
Yeah. O Dhananjaya, desire motivated actions are far inferior to this yoga of wisdom. Seek refuge in the wisdom, for wretched indeed are those who desire rewards of action.
So, continuing from the last couple of shlokas, basically, Sri Krishna ji is saying that there are two ways of doing action. So, action has to be done. We don't have a choice there, right? Action must be done. So, it is when we say it is our right to do an action, it isn't right to do an action per se, because action will be done. As long as you are in this world and you are alive, there will always be an action that you will do. Even if you choose to sit, that is also an action. There's action in that inaction. So the real choice that you have is your approach to the action, the purpose, the bhav that you bring to the action. And there are two ways to do it. Either you're doing it attached to the outcomes that will come out of it. So you're doing this to achieve the outcome of that action, or you're doing this because of something other than like you've renounced the action. So then Krishna ji is saying that essentially understand that anyone who will do an action for receiving the end outcome, those actions are far inferior in nature to the actions that are performed by renouncing the results of those actions. And he will talk about that. How do you do that? How can you have a superior action in this manner? So he tells us that there are three things that you need to do before you embark on any action. The first thing is to figure out whether it's a test. It's a test for us whether we are doing the action correctly or not. The first test is to check whether the action that you're doing is an essential duty in the first place or not. Is it a duty or not? That's your first test. The second one is it being done by the strength given by the Lord? So who is the doer here? Are you the doer, or is Krishna the doer? Where is your identity placed? Is your identity placed in the body consciousness and you have a sense of doership? Or your identity is with the Lord? If your identity is with the Lord, then you realize that it may appear that you are doing an action. It may appear that I am saying what I'm saying right now in this class, that I'm delivering this shlok to you, but it is actually not me. I am only here as an instrument of the Lord. and the Lord is speaking. It is His strength, it is His wisdom that is flowing through. He is connecting directly to you through me. I'm only an instrument here. So, where is this strength coming from? Having an ego to think that it is me delivering this class is the delusion of the highest order, right? So, the strength is given by the Lord and it is being done for His pleasure alone. So, for example, when I'm delivering this class, when Abhinav is delivering this class, what is the end outcome? If we have done our best in preparing and we are fully present here delivering the class, and if he is happy with what we have done, then that's it. Then the outcome has been achieved. Or are we doing this to hear some acclaim from someone? That Ashwin comes and says, "Oh, you delivered the class really well. Thank you so much." Am I doing that to feed my ego with that perspective? Because, oh, Ashwin did not say thank you today. He did not acknowledge that we did all the work. Then the purpose for us, the purpose already been lost. We've lost the battle there. It doesn't matter what the action is. It is always at the thought. The battles are won and lost at your purpose level, at your thought level, and at your bhav level. Right? So the action must be done by the strength given by the Lord. Understand, like it is always done by the strength of the Lord, but do we understand that in the first place? Do we acknowledge it in the first place? And it must be done for His pleasure only. That is when you renounce the results of the action. Okay? You're not attached to the outcome. Did everyone understand exactly what I wanted to say? Did somebody not understand? Am I going to get upset about one thing or the other? Did everyone join the class, not join the class? What happened? Like, none of that is important. Even if there is one person who joins the class, even if there is nobody who joins the class, we just deliver the class to Krishna, right? So it doesn't matter who is coming in, who's not coming in, whether they are like, so the class is being delivered by Krishna to Krishna. Okay. And it must be done with perfect equanimity of intellect, unmindful of pleasure in success or pain, right? So this is where we have to rise above the duality. Now, why are actions that are done in this manner considered superior to those that are driven by a desire-led outcome? Because whenever we are attached to an outcome from our action, basically that creates a lot of agitation and anxiety in the mind. If I'm going to write a test, then I'm always anxious about whether I will pass or fail, right? Because I'm writing that test to pass or fail. If I'm going into an interview, I'm doing that to get a job. Whether I will get a job or not get a job will always play on my mind and it will create anxiety because I'm so attached to that outcome, right? And in that moment, that agitation that comes in, that anxiety that comes in, will take a lot of mental energy. It does not let us sit still. It does not let us be fully present to what is happening in this moment. It does not allow us to be fully present to the people around us or to respond in the best possible manner. If we can take that anxiety and that emotion and the anxiousness out of the way, and we are completely calm, composed, fully present, then irrespective of what happens, even if a situation evolves in a manner that we have not prepared for it at all, we will still be, because of our presentness to the situation, be able to respond to it in a phenomenally good manner compared to if half my mind is clouded with anxiety. So, when we perform our actions in this manner, then they become extremely efficient. The entire thing is that we connect to Lord this way, and then His energy flows through us in the most efficient manner possible to make our actions beautiful and very, very effective. Much more effective than if we were chasing the result.
So I'll give you an example here, right? So that's crossing my mind right now is an example of a teacher. School teachers are blessings to this world, right? We benefited from them. But their job is quite boring. They read the same book to 4 classes, and then every year they're reading exactly the same thing, teaching kids who are restless and who don't pay attention. Some children have the right attitude, so they learn, some don't. And all of us have had experiences with teachers who have been really dull and boring. They've come to the classroom, they've written on the board, they've read from the book, they've made you underline, and your homework was go write these 2 pages and come back. And today, 20 years later, we remember nothing from their class. But there are also teachers who have inspired us, because when they taught us, they were taught us with a certain level of enthusiasm. And I can recall one such teacher of mine who was a math teacher, and it's not as if I was the best student and got 100 and 100 in math or whatever, but my love for math came because I saw she loved it so much. So my eagerness to eventually I became quite good at it because that eagerness seeped inside of me. So you could see that Mrs. Talwar there was not teaching this class of 50 kids because they might succeed or they might fail or what their test results will get slightly better. No, she was coming in, she was doing her duty in a way that inspired all of us. She grabbed our attention and she left. She has no idea today where we are to take any credit for it, right? She has basically done a very righteous duty. She's performed it without expecting anything in return from us, and she's done it and moved on. From her perspective, if she did that as a way of saying, this is my 2 cents back to the Lord or 2 cents back to the universe, that's it. She's now made that, and she's impacted millions of lives, right? And that's the power of doing a duty correctly, doing an action correctly.
And when we do, it isn't anything that we've not experienced. Like, he's just given a very real life example. There are such millions of real life examples where it becomes very clear when somebody is doing something with the right attitude versus somebody who's just doing it for the sake of doing it, or with a wrong attitude in the first place. It is obvious in our office, at our home. When somebody is putting their entire heart into it, and when they're doing their heart, when they're putting their heart into it and are enjoying the process of doing it, that itself is the reward. The result after that is immaterial. This entire journey, these 3 4 factors that we've just talked about, if we embrace them, then essentially the result that you will experience in a practical manner is that you will enjoy the process of doing something. The journey itself becomes the reward. It doesn't matter whether the end goal is exactly what you expected it to be or it is different from that. Whatever comes will be accepted with the prasad buddhi. And all of this, when you wrap it with the seva bhav, whatever you're doing it as your seva to Lord. When we are saying that we give the results, we offer the results, whatever the results may be, to Lord, it is essentially doing seva for the Lord. So whatever action we do, whether it is us taking care of our children, whether it is us delivering a duty in the office, whether it is us delivering a duty towards our siblings, towards our friends, even if that just involves us sitting and listening to them, whatever it is, if we are doing it with the seva bhav, then the results, the actions themselves become divine. So another example for this would be the companies. There are companies, all enterprises are profit-making enterprises. End goal, for them to be sustainable in this world, the rules of the game are such that you have to make money, right? There is no business enterprise that runs which does not have the objective of making money. But we have discovered along the way, and has been very well documented, that while all companies make money, there are some companies that do phenomenally better than others in terms of their sustainability, in terms of their profits, in terms of how much love they get from their consumers. And if you dwell down deeper into it, you would realize that it comes down to what are they really driven by? Are they being driven only by that end outcome, which is money making? Or is their end outcome, or is that just a byproduct? Money is a byproduct of delivering your services with the right bhav, with the right purpose in mind. So J&J for a very long time was one of the most, was considered and has always been considered one of the most ethical companies in the world, where the profit margins weren't the first thing. They always said the first and the most important people in our, the stakeholders in our ecosystem are our consumers. Then come the employees. Then come the investors. Investors were always the last. So money making is going to come only in the end, okay, as an outcome. It's a byproduct of our action. So padarth, the object, that thing that comes in, is not something that we attach ourselves to. That will happen whatever has to happen, right? Similarly, McDonald's. McDonald's serves a, that the quality of food they serve is typically not considered healthy at all, right? But their, what is their purpose? Their purpose is to deliver happiness, and it seeps through everything. It seeps through everything so much so that even though the product sucks, you have so many people going there day after day after day after day. It is incredible how that culture, that purpose, and that bhav has seeped through the entire organization, from the top to the lowest most person who is working in that company. If he's just acting as a server or if he's cleaning the tables, they make sure that that comes through. Similarly, Disney, right? So these are some of the companies, their purpose outshines everything else. So for, I'll give you an example. Like, I have always been against the idea of going to McDonald's. Like, every time we say, okay, we go to McDonald's, for me, it's like, okay, not the right choice. And yet, one of those days, we were at Marine Cove and we went into the McDonald's morning. And Vedant was, I think, 3.5 years old. And he was saying, I want an ice cream. And we told him, we're not going to get you an ice cream. This is like breakfast time. You eat something. There's no ice cream happening. He said, okay, I will go and get it myself. So we smiled like, how is he going to get it himself? Like 3.5-year-old kid. Like, okay, go get it. If you can get it, then you deserve it. Go. He actually went. He found a person in McDonald's and he told them that he wants an ice cream. Now, this person could have easily told him, go get $2 from your parents, then I'll give it to you, whatever. Like, he could have done that. That person actually went there. They actually have these little cones, like tiny cones, the ones like 1/3 the size of the regular cones, and he dolloped it up with a little bit of ice cream and gave it to him. And Vedant came back so happy with the enterprise he had shown, and he had actually gotten a result from it. I mean, we were shocked. We weren't expecting that outcome at all. We were completely shocked when he came back. And that was the day I changed my viewpoint of McDonald's, where I was like, they are really, like, they have empowered every single person down to the last person in the organization to deliver happiness. They are living up to their purpose. And then everything else is happening. Even if the product is so bad that everyone talks about it, right? Yet they prosper. So it's an example of when we do our actions correctly with the right attitude, the right bhav, and the journey becomes beautiful, then the results will follow. And sometimes the results may not be the results you want. So that's another prasad buddhi that we need to start to develop. Prasad, like, the results doesn't always have to be something that we seek for. It may be something that is good for us in the ultimate way, right? So we'll read. Sure.
Actions based on yoga of wisdom lead to ultimate welfare. So far, the technique of Karma Yoga has been explained, and it was told that the following points should be kept in mind while embarking on any action. Number one, is the proposed action an essential duty and righteous in itself? Number two, is it being performed with the strength given by the Lord and for His pleasure only? Number three, is it done with perfect equanimity of the intellect, unmindful of the pleasure in success or pain in its failure? A careful study will show that the actions of most of the people do not pass this three-way test. A majority of the actions are motivated by desires for pleasure. Sometimes actions are initiated even to cause suffering to others deliberately, though they may not be of any benefit to the doer. Condemning such acts, the Lord declares in the foregoing shloka that actions motivated by worldly desires are much inferior to those done with equanimity of the intellect. In fact, while initiating any action, few people give any consideration to the ultimate welfare. Therefore, the Lord says that safety lies in performing actions in accordance with the yoga of wisdom, with equanimity of the intellect, for that is the only way to escape the sufferings of the world. The tendency to secure the desired objectives anyhow results from constant thinking of deriving pleasure from the outcome of actions. This tendency gives rise to wretchedness and villainy.
So here, I think one thing that I want to bring out again is while initiating any action, few people give any consideration to their ultimate welfare. Ultimate welfare is us reaching our self-realization, is us improving our learning capacity, in cleansing our antahkaran. And sometimes the unfavorable outcomes that you may think of them as unfavorable outcomes may be the ones that one are the things that we need the most, because they are the ones that will help course correct for us. Sometimes we veer so far off that sometimes you need that little thappad to wake up and realize that we have veered very far away. And when you start looking at things from that perspective, there are no bad outcomes. Everything is a good outcome. Everything that happens takes us further towards our own ultimate goal and is being done only for our ultimate welfare. Lord is the biggest benefactor out there. He will never do anything that will go against us. He's very kind, very benevolent, and the ultimate benefactor. So when we start viewing things from that perspective, that is also called the prasad buddhi that we keep talking about.
The only the one thing that I'd add is coming back to that teacher example, right? You have a teacher who's effective and you have a teacher that is not effective. The difference between the teacher that is effective and not effective is not necessarily the actions that they're taking in class, but it's the bhav with which they're doing the actions. And Gita is all about the actions you're doing will more or less stay the same, but as long as you change your internal consciousness, your experience will change completely.
Yeah.
The experience with which you do the actions and the impact you create because of those actions will change completely. And we've seen this, like when we do our duty as a parent also, because you have to do it, versus when you do it with that bhav of seva and being with the child, the kid is so much easier to manage. You are so much happier. And when you do it that, अरे यार करना ही पड़ता है, irritate करके बोलोगे, you talk with a little bit of irritation, your tone of voice is there, kid immediately picks up and he starts mimicking that behavior. Same action results in such a big difference in result because the bhav is changed.
Rishabh, we are on shloka 2.49. 2.49.
Yeah, so let's continue reading.
The word kripana has been used in this shloka to denote wretchedness and villainy. The actual meaning of this word is miserliness. A miser is a person who, though possessed of riches, utilize his money prudently and thereby spends his life in utter penury and discomfort. What would be more unfortunate than depriving oneself of the supreme gain of human life, self-realization, which could easily be availed of by doing one's duties with equanimity? Instead, the entire life is wasted running after the chimerical gains of objectives of petty desires. This is why the Lord says, in the yoga of wisdom lies a person's salvation from the ills of human life.
So in other words, miser is a person who cannot give of himself or herself with the bhav of seva. Everything you do, you should get something in return. Everything is a transaction. I'm calling them for dinner. Now they better call me for dinner next time. Otherwise, yeah, I'm not going to call them again. I sent a WhatsApp happy birthday to Rishabh on his birthday. He didn't wish me. Aisa kaisa hai? Everything for a miser is a transaction. Moving that to a seva bhav is what a karma yogi does. You are doing it out of happiness, not because you expect something in return. So we need to change ourselves from being go-getters to go-givers. Then what will come will come. That's already written in our destiny. But a miser is a person who go gets, go gets, go gets. I will build that relationship because it will help me in my next job. He'll help me with my next investment. All of that. It's not, the bhav is completely different.
No, another very important thing to remember is when we are trying to get something, right? When that acquisitive mindset is there, where does that acquisitive mindset come from? It comes from a feeling of abhav, feeling of lack. I don't have something, that's why I will go and get it, right? If I already have it, then I'm satisfied, right? I don't have it. I have a lack of something, so I must go get it. It all starts from that. And whatever you may get, ultimately that lack is internal. Abhav is internal. It's a mental state of being and not a physical thing. So once that one thing that you are trying to acquire gets fulfilled, you would realize that that internal hole has not filled. The hole inside of you is still not filled. Now it will crave for something else. Then it will crave for something else. And that's the hamster's wheel we unfortunately find ourselves on a very consistent basis. One desire, when fulfilled, leads to another desire, and then another and another. It all starts from I am not fulfilled, I am empty, and I need to be filled. I am not happy, I need happiness by acquiring some of these things from outside. Versus I am doing things because I am a happy person. I am already happy wherever I am, whatever my circumstances may be. I'm in Singapore, my family is stuck in India. I'm not able to go back to India because to visit my parents. Or I like whatever be your circumstance, right? Everyone will have circumstances which they can think about as like, this is not necessarily fully favorable to me, right? There are always things that we are seeking to better in our lives. In that moment, and there's nobody who will say that no, I'm fully satisfied unless you are a karma yogi. And in that moment, if you can be happy, irrespective of the VVGP around us, that is the end goal that we are seeking towards. And that will come when you are whole and complete. And we are whole and complete. That is our real nature. Because inside of us is Krishna. He's not somewhere out there. He's not sitting in temples or in gurudwaras or in churches, right? He's not sitting there. He's not in the clouds up there. He's inside of us. And if he is whole and complete, we are whole and complete. And that is the journey. It's all an internal journey that we need to do. Every time we see ourselves seeking something outside, we have to ask ourselves inside, what is it that I am missing? What do I need to do for myself to complete myself internally? Then everything else outside will happen. If I'm angry at my son, then I'm not angry at him, I'm angry at myself. If I can calm myself down, if I can forgive myself first, I will forgive my son.
Same thing with husband.
Same thing. मौके पे चौका every time. Okay.
Okay.
The next shlok. Ramya, you read with me?
Connection.
Please read the connection, then we'll read the shloka.
Connection, thus prescribing performance of righteous duties with equanimity, the Lord points out the supreme gain of such actions.
Buddhi yukto jahati ha,
Buddhi yukto jahati
ubhe sukra dushkrite,
ubhe sukra dushkrite
tasmad yogaya yujyasva,
tasmad yogaya yujyasva
yogah karmasu kaushalam.
yoga karmasu kaushalam.
This is a very, very important shloka. So we are covering some golden shlokas in this chapter. Like the 2.47 that we did, which talked about karmanyevadhikaraste, very important shlok. Then 2.48, which said, what is yoga? It was the first definition of yoga in a practical manner. Samatvam yoga uchyate.
The last three words, the Sanskrit words in the shloka. Samatvam
Yoga uchyate. 2.48
which is equanimity is
is
yoga.
yoga. So we've heard yoga, definition of yoga in a lot of ways, but in a practical way, the most important definition for us to know in a practical way, what does it mean for me in my day-to-day life? Equanimity is yoga. And what does that lead to? If I have equanimity, I am established in yoga. And if I am established in yoga, it leads to adroitness of actions. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. Every action that we do while we are in the state of yoga, it will be the most efficient, the most effective action that is possible in that situation. So that is how our lives become much more efficient, effective, happy, and blissful.
So you can almost read it together. Samattam yog uchite yog karmasu kaushala.
Yeah.
But remember these 6 words. And that's all we need to remember as a karma yoga.
Yeah.
Samattam yog uchite, to connect through equanimity, yog karma kaushalam, jo bhi hum kaam karenge, whatever work we do, we become very efficient.
So emotional balance in mind causes actions to become extremely efficient. In one sentence. Okay? Let's read.
Possessed of this wisdom, one relinquishes the result of both virtuous and vicious deeds here in this world. Therefore, devote yourself to do this yoga, for yoga is nothing but great adroitness in action. Yoga, the great adroitness in action. This is a very important shloka. A person who acts with equanimity dedicates to the Lord the results of both virtuous and vicious deeds in this world. Happiness is the result of virtuous actions, and unhappiness is that of vicious actions. To act, it is prudent to perform only virtuous actions, keeping clear of vicious actions. Howsoever carefully one acts, sometimes vicious acts creep in incidentally while doing virtuous acts. More, even if a vow is taken to perform virtuous acts in this life, how can one escape the results of vicious acts done in previous lives? In this shloka, a great assurance is given by the Lord. He says that in this life, while doing one's duties with equanimity and without expectation of pleasure or apprehension of pain from their outcome, one automatically keeps clear of vicious acts.
So in a way, it's giving us an assurance. He understands that this is tough. He's not expecting perfection. As long as we are in the human body, we cannot be perfect. So he's not expecting perfection in any of our actions. He's not expecting excellence in any of our actions. He's only expecting commitment. And as long as you are committed, then all these acts that we sometimes do out of vicious actions or past vicious actions, they will burn. Just like that the wood cutter and the axe, right? He will sharpen the axe so much that it will cut the trunk regardless, as long as we keep hitting the tree trunk. That's what this shloka is all about. And explaining a bit more about Samatkan Yog Uchate Yog Karma Shu Kausalam, which is equanimity of mind leads to great efficiency. I have an example of a surgeon. Surgeon is a person whose literal actions save or kill a human being, right? One wrong decision, one wrong cut, one wrong dosage of a medication can be life or death for someone, for his patients. If a if a if a surgeon was attached to his outcome and result, there is no way he'd ever be able to do surgery. He would be so stressed about every single incision he makes. Everyone's body is different, and I don't know if you've ever seen surgeries, but the surgeon literally just puts his hand with a glove, of course, in the body. And he's like, this is that, this is this, this is that. And he's just moving his fingers around. And he's trusting his own training. He's trusting his own practice. He's trusting his purpose and intention. And he's doing that action. He can't even see what's happening underneath. Right? And if he was attached to his outcome, then today if his patient dies, tomorrow he won't be able to come and work. He is able to sleep at night knowing that I tried my best. Yes, there could have been a better doctor who might have saved this patient. And maybe I learned something from this death. Every death that happens in my watch, either it's Bhagwanji or it's my fault, I will learn from it, and we will better the medicine, we will better the process, and he moves on. And that's resulted in him saving millions of lives, right? Now, the same surgeon who is very, very qualified and skilled, you put their child on the table and he's expected to do the child's surgery. All of a sudden, what happens? He's attached to the outcome. I want my child to be healthy. I want my child to live. When that happens, what happens? He'll get stressed. He'll get anxious. He'll be like, no, should I? And that's why there's a rule in medicine that you can never operate on family members or people you know, even if you're the world's best surgeon. And this is nothing but a clear example. When you're attached to the results of an action, your action completely changes. But if you do it with equanimity, there is great efficiency, great learning, and that is called yoga. That's Yog Karmasu Kaushalam. Great efficiency that comes in when you're not attached to that outcome and you do your job. Yeah, please continue reading.
Even the virtuous acts are rendered incapable of yielding any consequential involvement in their outcome. Just as roasted seeds are rendered incapable of sprouting, though they may still be fit for eating. The unselfish performance of one's duties without coming in conflict with general welfare and with dedication to the Lord reduces to ashes the results of all acts done in previous lives. In the second line of this shloka,
so this first section, essentially, I said this earlier as well, is he's giving us assurance that it's not about perfection, it's not about excellence, it's about a commitment. We will falter and we will keep falling. But just like a ship, a ship that is chartering in an ocean, you change the ship 1 degree, 100 kilometers later, the ship will be in a completely different trajectory. And that's what he's trying to bring out in this shloka, is that your job is just to be committed. Don't chastise yourself if you are not perfect in your action or in your bhav or in your being. Just be committed. As long as you're committed, your ship is moving a couple of degrees. Aage jaake, you will be in a completely different destination. You know, some of you have spoken to me and mentioned about these big things that you're tackling, whether it's in your own mind, your temper, your anger, your ego, whatever else it is, and it seems like a really big monster. And for that, I always say, don't worry about the big monster. Worry only about your bhav and your commitment on working on it. As you keep moving 1 or 2 degrees, you will see over a period of time in this spiritual journey, you will reach a completely different life experience. And that's what he's saying, that you'll burn all those other vicious acts as long as you stay committed. Consistency is far more valuable than intensity. And in our life right now, in our culture right now, we tend to appreciate intensity more than consistency. I will go for every New Year resolution. Intensity is great. Everyone does New Year resolutions. Consistency is where we lack.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important piece. I guess it resonates a lot with me personally because this is something that I'm trying to implement in my life for last 2 years. Consistency over intensity. I've always been the kind of person who's like, if I'm going for a run, oh my gosh, like I have to do at least 5K. I have to do 10 kilometers. If I will let go of all the time for 1 hour, I have to take out for a 10-kilometer run, right? And so every day I will say I can't take out 1 hour, so I'm going to do that 10-kilometer run once a week. The benefits of that versus doing a 2 kilometer or 3 kilometer on a more consistent basis, so doing those 10 kilometers over 5 days or 4 days is far more beneficial than doing that 1 kilometer, that 1 day 10-kilometer run. And it's a lesson I have now, as I've gone through with that journey, I've personally come to realize how much truth is there in it. How much truth. I've read it in so many different places that now I've begun to realize it. So now, for me, it's my personal journey to get consistency over intensity in everything I do, in every interaction, whether it is exercise, whether it is time spent at family or at work, or it's response to mails or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
and it's when you chase perfection which doesn't exist or excellence that doesn't exist, it's so easy to lose our mental balance.
he's again talking about me here.
Right? It's so easy to get upset. But if you actually just work on commitment,
Yeah.
and the result will be whatever it is, that's it. You can always work on your own commitment. That's all that anybody can expect of you, right?
So, a few classes ago, somebody had asked this question, right? When we were discussing prarabdha, and we had said that every action creates a prarabdha because there's a consequence to be had. Good action or a bad action, a good consequence or bad consequence. But we then get stuck because of that, and that is the reason why we are always stuck in this cycle of birth and death to clear our prarabdha. And then the question that had been asked at that time was, then how can I continue to do actions but not get stuck in this mire of prarabdha? And here is our answer. This is the way to do it. So we do action, but the results do not stick to us at all. When we do it in a manner such that, one, we do it with equanimity of intellect. Second, we do this action only for the Lord, by the strength that is given by Him, for His pleasure alone, with the results of the action dedicated to Him. When we act in this manner, no consequence will stick to us. No prarabdha will get created for us. In fact, all our previous prarabdha will also get burnt to ashes. So what that means, it's a very big assurance to us, is that we don't have to live through every single action that we've done in the past. There is so much of sanchit karma we have, right, that is not yet realized. Doesn't mean that you have to come back into birth to experience all of it. We can start burning it away through one single action here today. And that is why it is possible for you to achieve moksha in this one lifetime itself, despite having accumulated, motivated actions through a large millennial of lifetimes.
Huh. Yes, Nana.
Yeah, I have a question regarding prarabdha. How about the actions during childhood? Like, as does that also incur a prarabdha? Because that time most of us are not aware of what we are doing, or as young children, basically.
So as young
Till
children, you are mostly you're born with a certain disposition, right? And with that disposition, you will continue to act, and yes, you will continue to accumulate prarabdha. But ultimately, prarabdha, as we said, it does not depend on your action. It depends on your purpose and bhav. And most children, their purpose and bhav is typically very pure, you know. So they will not accumulate prarabdha from that perspective. So even if Vedant today is throwing a tantrum, doesn't mean that he's going to accumulate a prarabdha because of that. Because if you have to see what his purpose or what his this thing is, maybe this is the only way he knows to express himself in that moment.
In fact, yesterday what happened was at home, Vedant said he was being a 5-year-old and he said, Mama, I'm going to kill you.
I'm going to kill you one day.
I'm going to kill you one day. And
Okay.
yeah, you all are laughing, right?
that happened here also. So yeah.
So we were just like, where did he learn this?
Avengers.
What's happening?
Avengers.
All of that, right? And then we like, okay, we have a conversation. So we had a conversation with him, like, Vedant, you have to say sorry. He said sorry. And then I'm like, Vedant, you just said something very wrong. Do you know what? He said, what? And I said, you just told Mama you will kill her. That's a very wrong. And he said, that's a wrong thing to say. So he didn't even know. So the action level pe children are very innocent because their bhav is never to hurt. When I explained it to him, that means hurting people and they'll get hurt, they'll get ouchy. He's like, oh no, I don't want to do that.
I mean, as they grow older, like teenagers and all that, that time there is a certain awareness, but they're not completely aware and they're under the influence of their hormones and things like that. So just that stage of life, you can't call them an adult also. So
yeah, I mean, I'm guessing their prarabdha will come in front of them. How they deal with it will be their own natural disposition. But what will be very true as you grow older and older and become more conscious is you will know whether you're doing the right thing or wrong thing, or whether it's in line with your principles or not. And then people will choose to shove it down and say, hey, that's not important. Making money is more important. And that will be their own experience and life and prarabdha that plays out. And that's fine.
By the way, it is never too early to start on the Gita journey, right? Most of us think that Gita is to be read when we are, when we've done living our life, right? In the last aspect. But that's like, as we hear that a lot in our Gita Parivar, that's like, doing civil engineering after a lifetime of building faulty bridges, right? So Gita is a manual for life. The earlier you start, the easier it is for you to live a more fruitful life. So in Singapore as well, in our Gita Parivar, the youngest, the class for the youngest children starts at somewhere around 6.5 years. So we have a toddlers class. We actually have now 2 toddlers classes. And then there is one, and then there are lots of classes for teenagers, for young adults. So 14, 15, 16-year-olds, there are a lot of them from 12-year onwards. They are in different classes that are specifically curated for them. So, most of the classes are around specific life experiences, right? A teenager is going through will have different questions and is going through a different life experience than us. So they have a separate class in their cohort. Then young adults in their 20s, early 30s, late 20s. There are lots of classes for young adults as well, being taken by young adults.
I thought this was the young adults class.
So if you are, if you know anyone who is interested in those classes, we can send you the roster of all the classes that are happening, and you can connect people up to the right set of people. So lots of people in our Gita Parivar have children attending different classes, that are more suitable to them.
Cool. Let's continue.
thank you.
Second line of
No. Rania, please continue. In the second line of this shloka, the Lord.
In the second line of this shloka, the Lord exhorts Arjuna to adopt this yoga of wisdom with equanimity. He says, adroitness in action lies in yoga only. It needs supreme adroitness to perform actions the yoga way. For such actions, liberate a person from the bondage of involvement in their results. Possible to do so only in human life. Creation are meant only for undergoing actions done in past life, and they do not allow any freedom to perform new actions. This freedom is available only to human beings, and one who avails of this freedom is really an adroit person. This constitutes a big stride towards attainment of liberation. Acting otherwise would amount to misuse of human life. A person who wastes this easily available golden chance is undoubtedly foolish.
Yeah.
So I think we have talked about this before, but we cannot stress the importance of this enough. There are every other yoni, every other way in which we can be born is a bhog yoni, in which we suffer or enjoy the consequences of other actions. If we are born as animals, if we've done, if we have to go through consequences that are not necessarily that good, and sometimes we have done a lot of, sakam bhav actions, sakam bhav as in the actions that are oriented because towards a desire. So desire oriented actions that we've done, but they're all righteous actions, very good actions. You've been a very good person doing all the right types of things, but with an attitude to get a certain result, right? Good results. I want to have certain felicities and stuff, right? Enjoy this world, but in a righteous manner. So dharma se arth ka arjan karna, right? So when you do that, then you will be born in the heavens, and there are 7 realms above the human realm. These are all the realms of gods. Even these seemingly really good, and these are things that have been talked about in Vedas as well and several other scriptures. Now, trying to get there is also again a bhogyoni. So you will have, apparently, you can, whatever you desire, basically you will get that. You just have to desire for it and it comes to you, right? But you have no free will there. There is no free will, there is no action that you can create. You will only clear out the prarabdha that you have accumulated, in this case positive prarabdha, and you will clear that out. There is no free will, there is nothing you can do there but to just experience that. Similarly, in the lower stratas also, you will only be an experiencer. You will not be able to create any new action, right? So again, these are all bhog yonis. The only yoni that is yog yoni is human life. After how many, lifetimes you would have become a human being? This is the only yoni in which we will get a free will. So whether you do pap or punya, whether you do anything good or bad, all of those things can happen only in human life. A dog, a cat they will act out of their instinct. Whatever they may do, even if it ends up in hurting someone, they will never accumulate any result out of that. They are only doing what they are supposed to do as per their instinct, as per their nature. They are hardwired. It is their dharma to do so, right? So it is only in human life that we have the opportunity to use our free will, our purusharth, to rise above our VVGP, our destiny, our sanskars, our prarabdha, and to do what is the right thing to do.
So after so many lives, if we've got this human life and we still behave like animals, where we chase likes and dislikes and preferences,
Pleasures.
then what a wasted life it has been. If we are using our intellect, which is such a powerful tool, to only chase the likes and try and reduce the dislikes, which are bound to happen in this world, then what a small use of such a powerful gift, through a gift that is so powerful that connects us to infinite bliss and infinite knowledge.
And that is the miserliness. That's the real miserliness. The krapan drishti, miserliness of attitude. This is where we need to get the vyavasaitmika buddhi into play. It's like walking into a store And then God is there as a shopkeeper and asking you, what do you want here? And we choose, I want this, and I want that, and I want that. And here God is saying, take me, take the shopkeeper, make him your own, then the entire shop is yours. If you had a Vyavasaitmika Buddhi and you were told you can only have one wish, what should you be asking for? You should ask for God, no? Then the entire shop is yours. But without that Vyavasaitmika Buddhi, we are left to, oh, I want this one thing and I want that one thing. Such a waste of that big wish that has been given to us. Okay, we'll continue. Rishabh, connection, please.
The Lord now describes the result of liberation from bondage of action.
Karmajam buddhi yukta hi.
Karmajam hi buddhi yukta hi.
Karmajam buddhi yukta hi.
Karmajam buddhi yukta hi.
Phalam tyaktva manishinah.
Phalam tyaktava manishinah.
Janma bandha vinirmuktah.
Janma bandha vinirmuktaha.
Padam gacchantya namayam.
Padam gacchantyam namayam.
Please read the italics.
The seers, possessed of this yoga of wisdom, abandoning the outcome of their actions, go to a state which is beyond all suffering.
So here, before we, sorry, I'm just cutting your flow. What's really powerful is the very first line. So karmajam buddhi yutta. So buddhi yutta is equanimity. Karmajam is born of karma, which is all of us. All of us are born for and out of our own karma, out of our own actions. But if we're equanimous and if we do phal tyaktava,
Phalam tyaktva, phal ka tyag.
we are manishina,
Manishinah, wise person.
We are a wise person, manishina. So that one line itself actually comprises what we've just been talking about the entire class.
And such a wise person gets freedom from the bondage of Janam and Mrityu. Janma, bandhan, freedom, mukta, mukt for bondage, freedom from the bondage of Janam and Mrityu. Okay. Now, a very important question that comes here is, what does it mean to let go of the phal? Phal tyag. What does phal tyag mean? We do an action, a result comes. So what happens? I get a promotion because I've worked so hard for my company. I get an increment in my salary. What do I do with that? Am I not supposed to take it? Should I give it back to my boss? Please don't give me the promotion. I don't want money raised. No, that is not what is phal tyag. Okay. So phal tyag does not mean giving up the fruits of your labor. What you have to give up is the attachment to that fruit of the labor. Attachment is what needs to be given up. So you do an action to the best of your abilities in the manner that we just talked about in the previous two shlokas, and a result may come which you may consider favorable, and there may be a result that is unfavorable. If it is unfavorable, then also, first of all, we have to stop saying that it's an unfavorable result, right? It may be something that you did not expect, but it's a blessing for you to learn something from. What did not go well? What could you have learned from? What will you do better next time? Right? So we learn from that. Or we get result that we expected. In which case, prasad buddhi comes in, and we take it with full gratefulness. We accept that, and then we use it. If I got a raise in my salary, now I take it with that prasad buddhi, then what purpose will I put it to use for? Will that only, I got like, X amount of increment in my salary, am I going to put that X amount for consumption? Even if that consumption means, saving for future consumption, right? Is it something that will go completely into increasing my consumption? Or will I use that consumption towards a larger goal? Right? So all of that comes down to, and tomorrow if it is not there, will I get upset? I got a raise this year. Next year, I again worked very hard. Did you work very hard because you have to work hard, or did you work very hard because you got a raise and now you want the same thing again next year? And then that next year the raise did not come. Then are you going to be so attached to that outcome that you feel disappointed, you get upset, you get angry, and you're like, now what is the point of doing all this hard work if I don't get a raise? Right? So fal ka tyag does not mean that we will not enjoy the fruits of labor, but we actually have to give up the attachment to those fruits of labor. So if they come, we say thank you, we enjoy them, we use them. If we do not get it, we move on. It's okay. It's something for us to learn. Or maybe it's just going to happen sometime later. It doesn't matter. Attachment has to be given up.
No, and it's only when you see things with equanimity will you ever see the real purpose behind something. Because your mind is calm enough later on to actually appreciate the purpose behind something. So I'm failing to think of a good example, but I will come to you soon with an example.
Another important concept here is fal ka tyag, right? So we've been talking about prasad buddhi for a very long time. Prasad buddhi starts with tyag buddhi. Okay, we started with the tyag and tyag of the fal. This entire creation has been started with the first act was that of tyag. When Brahman said, what's the word there? Eko ham bahusyami. That's how the creation is deemed to have occurred. Eko ham bahusyami. It was an action of tyag, where he said, I am one, let there be many. I am one, let there be many was an act of tyag, of giving up his singularity. When you are in that singularity, you are in bliss. You're giving that up for the duality. And duality comes wherever there is life, there is dislike. There is happiness, there is sorrow. There is pain, there is suffering, same as happiness. There is sun, there is rain. So he gave up his singularity and the bliss related with singularity for the duality. The very act of creation started, the first step was tyag, giving up something. So every action that we undertake, it must start with tyag buddhi. The intellect that is giving up. And what do we have to give up? Give up our ego. This action is being done by the strength given by the Lord. Give up our attachment to the results of the action. Very important. If we can do that, that leads us to equanimity of intellect, which then leads us to yoga, which then leads us to very efficient outcomes in this world itself. So it's a positive circular economy. Let's read.
Attainment of the supreme state by the yoga of wisdom. A person possessed of this yoga of wisdom is called Manishi, or a contemplative person, or a seer. The outcome of actions of such a person is dedicated at the feet of the Lord, just as a devoted worshipper offers flowers at the feet of a deity in a temple. This dedication of actions to the Lord results in emancipation from the bondage of births and deaths. Not only this, it leads to attainment of that supreme state where there is not even a shadow of likes, dislikes, pleasure, pain, etc. Attainment of that state guarantees enjoyment of the greatest bliss while performing all worldly duties. When this state is attained, even while living in this world, the risk of falling in the cycle of birth and death after relinquishing it does not arise at all. Such a person not only attains self-emancipation, but in addition, emancipates others too, connected by ties of affection. Such a person becomes emancipated even while living in the world.
So moksha is not to be attained after death. It is totally possible to achieve it here and now by living in this world. The the felicities of heaven that we talk about are to be experienced in this world, whether they are through enjoyment of the material world because our actions have led to those, or because of the peace of mind that we experience because of having done our duty to the best of our ability. And that is the real heaven. And the real hell is when we haven't done so and we go into a state where we are blaming ourselves for not having done something. And those are the fires of hell that we burn. Nobody else burns us. We burn ourselves. The heaven and the hell is inside of us. The Kauravas and the Pandavas are inside of us. The Kurukshetra is this body.
Can you repeat once again what you said, the hell and the heaven, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Rita. So the heaven and the experience of heaven and the hell's fires that we talk so much about, or we have heard so much about in scriptures, they are not an external phenomena. They are a very much an internal phenomena. So the peace of mind, the lightness of being, we can experience when we have done our duty to the best of our ability is the felicity of heaven, whether a favorable outcome accrues out of it or not. It may lead to us to material enjoyment as well, which would be an addition to the mental peace and mental calmness that we experience. On the other hand, we may be the richest person in the world, and yet there may be a lot of anxiety that is brewing up inside of us. Sometimes that anxiety may be because I am trying to preserve something and I do not want to lose it, or it could be because of a relationship, or it could be because of like umpteen reasons, right? When we are in that mindset of acquisition and preservation, yogakshem, which God said you do not have to worry about, right? Shloka 9.22, we will see in the middle of Gita, where he will give us an assurance that I will bring to you what you need and I will preserve for you what you need. However, if we go away from that and we are putting all our efforts, all our enterprise, all our energy into that yogakshem only, then the anxiety that follows in the wake of it are the fires in which we can burn. And we experience that, we've heard it so many times, like there are lots of people who are extremely rich, who have reached there and have come out, they have the courage to come out and say, this is not enough. This is not, it has not given me the happiness or the calmness that I was looking for. And they have done all of that. We hear that and we're like, yeah, if I had $1 billion, then I would be doing the same, right? But it takes a lot of courage to have spent years of your life getting to that stage. It is not easy. It's so toilsome to work towards those goals, right? It is not easy. So that having burned all of that, reaching that goal and then realize, oh my gosh, like I'm up on a peak, but it is the wrong peak to be on. It's a very big admission to make. But there are lots of people, more recent times that I hear of is Bill Gates, where they reach that status and then they realize that there is something more beyond this. I need something else for self-fulfillment, for happiness. And then they will start something else.
Then they'll start doing seva.
Seva. That we
They
see.
will start doing service. They will start doing seva because they realize real fulfillment comes from there. And in this shloka, there is basically saying all of us can be there. We don't need to be on that peak. We don't need to go through all that suffering to reach that peak.
And then have that realization that we were on the wrong journey all through these years. And we have now reached a peak, but it's the wrong peak. And now you're looking at another peak in the distance and saying, oh my gosh, like I have to get there now.
There is this entire movie, the Padman movie. It's a Hindi movie. It's about a guy, it's a true life story. And there's a TED talk that he's given as well about a villager who got married, and it was a what's the word? It was
Sanitary napkin.
Yeah, the sanitary napkin. So his wife was.
He took up the hygiene of women as a life goal.
It was considered a taboo to use sanitary napkin or even touch the woman during the period, and he took that up as an issue. And today he's built $100 million enterprise, which is employing women, for women, building pads for villagers, which are like 1/10 the cost of these commercial companies. And it all started with a Seva Bhav. And when you look at these, when you look at more and more people, you realize that lots of these type of examples, they started from nothing. They just chose to do Seva. So there is a 4-minute video that came in my WhatsApp feed. I will, there are actually 2 videos. I will share both of them with you. They're quite powerful in illustrating this example.
So start of every action should be from Tyag Bhav. Tyag, giving up our ego, giving up our sense of doership, giving up attachment to the results of the actions, and must be done with a Seva Bhav.
And so often Seva Bhav, we get restricted with it because we are immediately our intelligence comes in and says, no, who will pay for it? How will we sustain it? How do we build such a big business? It's unsustainable. Who would, like, you think of all the problems and that kills that energy, and you do it and you give up on those ideas. But honestly, Seva Bhav, when you do it with the right purpose, 15 people will stand up and come out of nowhere, and that will be Bhagwan's blessing. People will come out of woodsheds to kind of support your idea.
And every time we talk of Tyag, we talk of Seva, most of us will tend to go into an NGO mode, right? But that is not the case. Okay, like we said, we talked about J&J, we talked about McD's, we talk about so many other companies which are for-profit enterprises, but they have the right attitude, the right purpose, the right bhav, right? And that is what is important. So it isn't as if like we have to go into a NGO mode. We don't have to set up an NGO to do seva, right? Seva is on our day-to-day basis. Seva in our family first. Seva to ourselves before that. Forgiving ourselves for the past mistakes we have made. Forgiving ourselves for the mistakes we will continue to make along this. And then the tyag on an everyday basis of our sense of doership, of our sense of expectations from our family members first. I do this, then they must do this. Expectation of a certain behavior from our children. You know, expectations that we have tons of expectations from our spouses, right? So many expectations. Giving up that sense of expectation from our spouses to begin with, from our children, from our bosses. Don't focus on what they can do for me. Focus on what you can do for them in every relationship. Your family, your children, your friends, your workplace, everywhere. What can I give first? The more you give, the more the world will give back to you. The laws of nature work in every way.
Luckily, we are recording this session, so I will save the clip.
Could you just before this, you mentioned actions must begin with tyag, and you mentioned 3 other things. Could you repeat that, please? Tyag and seva and 2 others.
Tyag and seva. So what do you do tyag of? That is the important thing, right? We do tyag of our sense of doership, right? So purpose, the bhav with which we do something, that becomes very important.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
We can go to the next one?
No, 58.
Oh, okay.
We're done.
Didn't realize the time.
Yeah, we're purposely going a bit slow. We're trying to add more examples because we will cover a lot of these concepts later on, and we will repeat a lot of things. But these are very heavy shlokas. These are, we're learning a lot reading.
One more thing before I close out, right? We talked about consistency. So consistency in everything, which basically includes Swadhyay. Read 2 shlokas every day. It takes 10 minutes. Do it in the morning, do it before you sleep, do it in the afternoon, do it whenever you have time. Read 2 shlokas every single day will take you further on your journey than spending 3 hours on one particular day. 10 minutes a day, because it acts as a reminder for ourselves. and it will build your awareness of who you are being on a day-to-day basis. Change will start with awareness and Namjap. Yes.
I think a lot of you have messaged me that you guys are doing it and you guys are seeing a huge amount of benefit. And it's not as if you're doing, it's just a way of, like, I'm not going to share what people have written, but it's brilliant to see. But that's the power of doing it consistently. Yeah.
And these are all little crutches, right? We are all starting out on our journey. So these are all small crutches for us to consistently develop that mental muscle. Yeah.
Okay. Anita, are you comfortable leading the shlokas or would you like to repeat again?
No, I can read it.
Lovely. So end with the 3 ohms, okay?
Om Sarvesham Savsir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Om Sarve Bhavantu Suginagar Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Batrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dugaba Bhavet. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amrutam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamata Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudichyate Purnamsya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
That was very, very well done, Anita. I could see that you've put in practice on reading and the pronunciations, and it flew fluently from your lips. That was beautiful. Thank you.
One last thing before I go, I keep adding last things. The last chant in this closing shlokas is very, very powerful. Please read that again. We just read, we talked about that, the whole desire-oriented actions, they start from a sense of abhav, a sense of not being complete, a sense of acquisition because I need something filled, right? I'm not complete. The last shloka is actually talking about what is our real nature. I am whole and complete. That in one sentence is that entire shloka, which we invoke on an everyday basis. That I'm whole and complete by myself. It's a beautiful, beautiful shloka. Thank you.
I would like to know, are we recording these sessions? Are we recording the sessions and we have recordings to listen?